When it comes to the issue of people falsely claiming Indigenous identity, Saskatchewan has already had 3 big names. Former Judge Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, former Professor Carrie Barassa, and former University of Regina President Vianne Timmins have all had their Indigenous identity called into question. Betty Nippi-Albright is the Saskatchewan NDP's critic for First Nations and Métis relations. She spoke with Dennis Ward earlier about preventing pretendianism.
Betty, thanks so much for being with us here.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, as we know, in recent years, there's been some pretty high-profile cases of people falsely claiming Indigenous identity in high-ranking places. What can the provincial government in Saskatchewan do you think, to stop this from happening in the future?
Well, there's things that our provincial government can do. We have different ministries that have non-Indigenous people working there. And I think one of the things that is a good starting place for the province of Saskatchewan to do is start within their own ministries of having folks, current employees, self-identifying employees sign an attestation form. I think that could be easily implemented, because the challenge is not about new hires, it's about those that are already in those positions that have self-identified.
Yeah, why do you think it's important to go back and look at people who've been in their positions for maybe years or decades?
Well, we know that self-identification does not work and has not worked for a long time. And when organizations were looking at recruiting Indigenous people, it created an opening for non-Indigenous people to apply for those positions and falsify their indigeneity.
What action do you think employers should be taking to ensure that people who self-identify or claim indigeneity are legitimately Indigenous?
I think what works and was started at federal corrections was having employees sign an attestation form. And also during COVID, we found the attestation forms were signed for individuals working in the health sector that were that they had to prove that they had their vaccines. So I think it's something that employers can introduce to existing employees. It's not an issue with new hires. It's ones that have been there for years that have claimed to be Indigenous when they're not.
I guess, why do you think it's not an issue for new hires?
Because we know that Indigenous people across Saskatchewan as well as across Canada have been more vocal about pretendians, and it's going to be more of a deterrent for new people wanting to be hired, and I'm hoping that employers, and I do believe employers are starting to look at, okay, we need to find out if this person is actually Indigenous.
For sure. Do you think there should be repercussions for people who have been claiming false indigeneity for years?
Absolutely. I think the attestation forms that were introduced during COVID, they in there said if they are being false with the information that they could be fired. And I think those are things that could happen. And also for those that have received awards, and those need to be stripped from them. And because it's perpetuating the colonial violence against Indigenous people. And often it's women that Indigenous women that have worked very hard to try and be in those positions, and when non-Indigenous people take over those positions, it's very difficult for the rest of us.
Certainly an issue that isn't going away. Betty, appreciate you taking some time for us here to talk about it.
Thank you for having me.